Доброе утро. Thank you. Why can't I do this in English? Anyway, thank you for that really very nice.
So sorry about that.
That's right. Thank you very much for that very, very nice introduction. And you know, when I actually started architecture, I mean, Louis Kahn was a big hero of mine. And this quote about that schools began with a man under a tree who did not know he was a teacher discussing his realization with a few who did not know they were students. Little did I know that teachers and students would be my client core. And what I've done is, as I said, I'm an architect, and my focus is on teaching and learning spaces for schools, libraries, colleges, and universities. But what does a learning space look like? Well, you know, when I started out, it was lines of desks in a row. It was interaction. Yeah. Interaction meant staying awake. Participation, hit or miss. You know, and the teacher was this unquestionable authority. And that followed pretty much into my architectural education, where we were taught to revere the mythic gods of modern architecture, Louis Sullivan, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and their mantras. Form follows function. A house is a machine for living. Less is more. We were taught from the top of Mount Olympus down. And then I got a career in a big architectural firm where I literally learned how it was done. Yep, we did the designs. We got the construction drawings done. We yelled and screamed with the contractor. We got it built. The users moved in. Oh yeah, the users. They didn't really have much activity or participation in the whole process. A few years later, I was involved in a project for a college building and went to the ribbon cutting ceremony. And this building included a tower that had 3 floors for faculty offices. I overheard one of the professors talking to one of the administrators, and this professor said, you know, my colleagues and I are not so keen about moving into this new building. You know, after all, in our old building, we have 1 floor for all our faculty, and it really gives us a great sense of community. Administrator said, too bad it's built now. And I must say, I really thought that time that we'd blown it. And as I then started my own practice, I kept coming back to that gnawing thought that somehow we had disrupted building community instead of building one, you know, like a barn raising. And I was determined that in the future we would bring the users to the table. And I got that opportunity doing a library project at a liberal arts college that was involved bringing together a series of different academic groups into one building. And they would share the library resources, the spaces, the teaching spaces, and the offices. We had to break down the silos. We got together with the groups of representative teachers and students and administrators at the table. And then the outcome of that was a new vision of a kind of a library that really began to mix and blur the boundaries of activities and departments, and now one community coming together in a building. And you entered the building through this big central atrium that provided this visibility that you knew where you were. It gave a sense of orientation to the activities and the invitation to participate. And even the students got into it, into their own drawing, you know, of the space for the college newspaper, to kind of proclaim that this was now a favorite destination for study and meeting friends. And then the students began to take over the space and really began to feel ownership of the spaces. Wherever you were in the library, you could see up and down and across. And this idea of visibility, transparency, you can see what other people were doing, was really an invitation as well to participate, as well as an interesting opportunity to have chance encounters. Instead of browsing the stacks, you could walk around the library and browsing people. And this idea of mixing spaces, there was public spaces next to private spaces, teaching spaces that included lecture halls and seminar rooms were amongst the book stacks. And as I began to do more learning spaces, working with educators, who then began to teach me more about what learning was about, and that the important ingredient for them, an understanding for adults, and especially children, was collaboration. And collaborative settings were the trend going forward for a lot of dot-com companies that mixed office spaces that had work and play. And this idea of work and play became an idea when we had an opportunity to do school libraries for the New York City public school system. And here was an opportunity to transform existing spaces into playgrounds for learning that had open and flexible spaces that promoted kinds of collaboration. And we got the users involved here in a different way, the students. They produced and wrote poetry that then became embedded in these bands above the book stacks. And this idea of children participation, a series of questions, then became the decor of the ceiling and the walls of this reconstructed attic in another public school. And the idea of the furniture, light, movable, children empowered to rearrange it, rearranging their own environment, taking control, taking ownership of the space. And it reminded me of this idea that William White, the famed urban anthropologist, had talked about in his own studies of way people use chairs in public spaces. And this is in Bryant Park, really examining how people interact and that power of choice. And he says the possibility of choice is as important as the exercise of it. And this is the thing, choice, the possibility of choice. And having that being the power of that the flexibility provides the opportunity of choice and allows you then to collaborate. Which then brought me to this project in Kyrgyzstan. I'm not showing any movies. But, this is a chance to do this project in this far end of the Eastern Empire, former USSR, along the ancient Silk Road. And for me, the inspiration was the local culture. Really getting a chance to learn and experience what nomadic culture was and what that meant today. And it occurred to me that, today's students, they really are like modern nomads. And they form these mobile, and whether they're in Central Asia or in Central Park, they form these mobile communities and friendships enabled by Wi-Fi and a cup of coffee or a cup of joe and a cup of chai. This is what brings them together. And as nomads, they don't really own space, they roam space. But the thing that they feel very closely, they feel the sense of ownership of any space they are at any given time. And this is what a really powerful observation that I noticed. And when I got to AUCA, the first time I went there, to Bishkek, in 2009, this is the existing building that the college occupies, this former Soviet office building, gray, grim, hulking, powerful structure. Okay, I'm going inside now, and I'm thinking the inside is going to be like a repeat, this kind of experience. But I go inside, and the place is abuzz. I mean, it is so energetic. A dense mix of students, faculty, sitting, talking, walking, conversing, exchanging ideas. The place was on fire, but it was also this representation of a very, very diverse group of people represented by the 22 flags that were hanging in the entry hall. And the hallways, they weren't just hallways to kind of move around. They were like these pop-up market bazaars where students and faculty set up stations to display and showcase events that are happening that week, or cultural, different kinds of foods from different parts of the world, environmental ideas, but all this kind of rich information. It was like Google search on a street. And the thing is, they were maximizing every square inch of the place, or actually square meter in this case. And there was, wherever you were, there was a place to eat, there was a place to greet, there was a place to eat. And this kind of rich tapestry and mix was something that I thought was, I had never experienced before. And it again reminded me that, that in some ways, density, you kind of think, oh, it's just too crowded. Well, in this case, the density didn't feel good. It had a sweet spot. It wasn't so dense that it felt uncomfortable. It actually felt very, very welcoming. Kind of like in this room here. In fact, I'm really glad it's full. I would have been very uncomfortable talking to an empty crowd. But people create comfort. And I think that's what William White said, again, when he said that what attracts people most, it would appear, is other people. Eureka. The ingredient for this thinking about this university, for this new space and its new campus, density. It had to have this kind of density that was already there, and how to transfer that into the new space. That was the key ingredient. And it made me think about cities like New York, where density enables this kind of energy and creativity of tight cities, where it's dense streets kind of promote this level of interaction. And in fact, living in New York City is this vast school of 1 million classrooms. And the other thing, density takes up less space. It conserves. It consumes so much less. You can get more out of it. And you think in this era when energy is so costly and limited, that the idea of taking up less space to do more has economic value. And it made me think, less is more. Maybe he's got it right. But I never, I do a lot of work with other colleges, and I've visited so many around this country. And they're really, liberal arts colleges here in this country are beautiful places. There's these beautiful park settings. But you don't get that sense of energy that I felt when I went to American University. And so we had to create a master plan for the new campus, and it needed to be for 1,300 students, and all the kinds of functions and needs that any liberal arts college has in the United States. The idea was to how to put it into a fraction of that space. And the fraction of space, not to make it less, but to make it more active, and actually to cost less at the same time. And we also, naturally, in this case, it was a great time. We had a meeting with faculty and students students said, in their, in the future, what do we want for the next building? They said, we want more places where we can study. We want more places where we can meet our friends. We want more places that we can develop ideas, collaborate, work independently. So we created these conversation pit study areas in the hallways. Again, we took this idea that they had before, hallways, and made the hallways destinations that included cyber cafes within them. And then you could see them from wherever you are in the building. And where you kind of circulated around, this was highly visible. And the teachers, they wanted flexible classrooms. They wanted classrooms where they could, do formalized kinds of lectures, or seminar rooms, or even just kind of breakout sessions for doing collaborative work. And this idea about the pedagogy, about breaking down the boundaries in the classroom between teacher and student became an important generator for thinking about these spaces. And the other thing that they both said, teachers and students said, we have no place to meet one-on-one in our present facility. How can you make that happen? And we also have no place to meet as an entire community. So in response, we created this large center space that was rimmed on its sides and the back spaces a bank of smaller meeting spaces where 2 or 3 people could meet and have private conversations. And at the same time, the faculty, they wouldn't own, in fact, we made it so that the faculty didn't have any individual offices. There was a common area where they sat, but they had access to these meeting rooms. And basically what was understood by everybody is, I may not own a space like a nomad, but I have access to the 180,000 square feet of the rest of the building. And that was sort of the idea. And so this center space became this shared community space, kind of like an interior quad, that was also good for everyday hanging out and milling and meeting people, but also on occasions could be this performance hall. And this idea that it combined this visibility and flexibility, and thinking about, well, how could we transfer that energy that I experienced when I first walked in the building? And the answer was the density. How do we bring this all together close, kind of like a cruise ship? in some way? And as you said, in parenthetically, since Bishkek is one of the farthest places on the earth to an ocean. But this idea of bringing together visibility, flexibility, and density, these are the tools for doing a learning space. And this idea of a learning space could be anywhere. It doesn't necessarily mean to be where you think it is. And I think that's an opportunity thinking about libraries, thinking about your home, thinking about offices. And so kind of in a summary, how have I seen this evolution of learning spaces over my career, my childhood from that point of view, where it's from opacity to flexibility, rigidity to flexibility, and sprawl to density. And what has been the impact of all of that? Visibility leads to participation, and flexibility, that promotes collaboration, and most importantly, the newest one for me, density. That's the one that generates interaction. These are all the tools, the ingredients for education. Getting back to AUC, last spring, when they were in the construction, they were finishing the core and shell of the new building. The college had this idea. You know what? Let's have graduation in last spring in the construction. We could never do that here. There were 1,000 building code violations to overcome. But you know, nomads don't know about these building codes. So the college personnel took over this space, and after the contractor cleaned it out some, but the college, they brought in rugs, they brought in banners, they brought in their flags, they brought in music, they brought in sound systems, they brought their people and their friends, all to transform this very, very raw space into a personalized spectacle, you know, for the graduates who got to experience the first time. They were graduating, but so many other students were like, we'll never get to use the building. Yes, you did. And what they did, they had an insight, and the college began to experience what we'd all been imagining through the design process. And this is like an important point, because in most of our design processes, we never get to have the clients and the users experience the construction and to kind of live it and to mock it up in some way.
Yeah, I found that, but he said it was the wrong one.
And this was such an important moment that we wanted to kind of capture and imagine in the future. And I'm thinking about future buildings and spaces. And you know, it's kind of funny. It's almost as if when an architect hands over a new building to users, it's kind of like handing over somebody a smartphone who's never had or owned one or used it before. You know, sure, you know, a smartphone, kind of like a building, you think is intuitive to use, you know, but what you don't realize is that the power, that the awesome power that this has, of the instrument, is not necessarily readily apparent. You've got to like fiddle with it. You got to learn how to use it somewhat, experiment, but you really basically, and someone has to tell you a little bit more, get you going, but you really have to learn how to use it, learning it. And it's kind of like a building. In the same way that once you start to know how to use your smartphone, then it's your prized possession, okay? You don't want to lose it, it's always with you. It's like a building, you don't want to lose it, you want to understand it, you want to own it. And so that's the whole point. You get to own your building, like you get to own your iPhone, unlock its potential. Thank you very much.